What it do, comic babies? I'm Bunkmaster B, and today we are talking about, well, the beginning times. The end times. We're taking it back to the biblical flood, and we are talking about Dark Ark, out by Aftershock. This is a series that was written by Cullen Bunn and illustrated by Juan Doe. I gotta put a big disclaimer up first. So, most of these videos, if you're watching these, you know, there's some kind of level of horror, probably some kind of level of, of violence and things like that. Most of that kind of goes without saying if you're watching these videos. This is the first one that if you've got trouble with themes, I'm not gonna quite say blasphemous, but this is a biblical story, and it's sort of an alternate telling about an ark that left at the same time that God flooded the world and Noah's Ark was going out and saving man and the animals. This story tells the story of a Dark Ark, as you might expect, and tells the story of a sorcerer who is tasked by basically the devil, whom he draws his powers on, that he needs to save the world of monsters so that they will not die in the flood. There's nothing necessarily directly blasphemous against it. It basically takes the story that we are presented of the land being flooded. It takes that as fact and sort of gives us this parallel story that goes with it. But if you're someone who's sensitive to demons and anything kind of twisting, any sort of religious story, especially Christian iconography, this is not going to be the one for you. Kicks, click off right now. This is not a Kicks book. But if you can get by that, it's actually a really interesting story, and probably not in the ways that you think it is. I'd almost argue that this is not a horror book, and it's almost more of sort of a dark adventure. It's billed as a prison story, and it opens up with a murder, and the idea is that basically the monsters are held underneath the ark, and they need to basically stay under the cover of God's detection. The land was supposed to be flooded to be cleansed of sin, and there's a whole lot of sin on this boat. Monsters, demons, vampires, things of that nature. A lot of things that were supposed to die, they didn't. They're on this boat. There's some bad stuff that's going on. And the idea is that basically the main character is a sorcerer, and he's been tasked with bringing these monsters to the new world so that they can flourish, but they have to also allow for Noah's Ark to be there, so that way the idea is that basically they need to have a food source that's there, and they want to continue the world that was. And we get kind of to begin with whodunit about a murder that happens there, but really it goes into a lot more than that. So, let's not talk about it sort of abstractly. Let's talk about it directly. Let's check it out. Alright, so if you didn't hear it before, this is not a blasphemous book, but it does touch on Judeo-Christian history, mythology, iconography, a lot of things like that. If that's not for you, if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, click off the video now. I'm not going to be offended. So, this particular book, this is the complete series. This has the main series, Dark Ark. It's got the one-shot Impact, and then it's got the follow-up miniseries, After the Flood 1 through 5. I'm just going to be talking about the main series right here, because that's already 15 issues, and we're certainly not going to be covering all of that. but little introduction there where Cullen Bunn basically had just a quirky little pitch and how they liked it picked up, and he was like, well, man, now I actually got to make a series around this. So everybody knows about Noah's Ark. Takes 2 of every animal. God floods the world to cleanse it from sin. And, I think part of the whole idea of this is, that schoolhood myth that, there used to be unicorns, but Noah couldn't find them, and they were left behind in the ark, and so there wasn't. But there's this second ark. There's this Dark Ark. And all of the sort of myths and monsters of legend and folklore, that's where they all are. So here we see Noah's Ark, and we see some elephants. And then we get a harpy over here, who is spying on Noah's Ark. And it's taken back. And we see our sorcerer, who is tasked by his devil to shepherd his monsters to the new world. And they are all chained up down below. And turns out when you put a whole bunch of monsters together, things don't necessarily go great. And, well, there's not enough food. The food source that is there, we're not going to talk about right now. And nobody wants to be there. And there's a power struggle going on between the monsters that are there, the sorcerer who is above, and sort of the different species of monsters. This is Nex, the head of the vampires. And it's a really interesting power struggle that's going on, especially where this devil has tasked the sorcerer. He needs to get not only his monstrous boat there, but Noah needs to make it to the land safely. And so he has to look after not only the lives that he is entrusted with, but also Noah, and doing so without the detection of God and divine retribution. So the sorcerer's family, they're all on there with it. They live above, and they're all tasked with keeping the peace below. And at the very end of the first issue, this isn't a spoiler, it's the first issue, there's a Naga that's killed. And it becomes this kind of whodunit of who is it that has broken this rule that none on this boat shall be harmed. And this is where it basically becomes a little bit of a prison story. And that's what kind of the first arc is. We have Shrey, the sorcerer, as kind of the prison warden, trying to find out who it is that committed this murder. And then, we get a prison riot that's going on. So he needs to take control, and he needs to figure out how it happened. But that's only the beginning of it. And so it begins from there. But then again, we get some interesting themes about sort of the price that we pay, what we owe to those in our charge. What does it mean to be a caretaker? What is the greatest good that we serve? There's this whole idea of birth and rebirth. There's this idea of, parents and child. And there's a lot of things that go on in something you wouldn't necessarily think in sort of like a dark demon book. Juan Doe's art is going to be hit or miss for some people. There are some times that I really like it. I think he does sort of base monsters pretty well. The more human they get, like this Manticore, he never quite does it for me. But some of just like these sort of monstrous things where we don't really have the human, I kind of like that. I don't necessarily love the way he drops his people, but it all kind of works together for this book. And the colors that Dave Stewart does on this, again, he's got a lot of sort of a lot of tonal work where you get a lot of contrast to sort of bring through what you get there. I think there's a little bit more jumping around than I would necessarily like to see. Like, we get a lot of this sort of green, palette on this one, and then going right to a red, and we get a lot of things that kind of jump back and forth with that. And we go back over here to sort of this muted above a board. I'd like to see a little bit more consistent color palette, but for the most part it works. And again, we just get all of these different factions sort of working towards their own ends. It certainly doesn't start out as a horror book, but there are definitely some horrifying parts a little bit later. There's some realizations that go with it, and it very much has sort of a claustrophobic, spooky, sort of horrific feel to it. It's never going to be outright scary, but it's chilling enough that I would still include this as sort of, it's dealing with vampires and whatnot, so thematically it's certainly right there. So, anyway, Dark Ark. Definitely worth a check. And that's it. That is Dark Ark by Cullen Bunn and Juan Doe. Of course, Dave Sharpe is on lettering because it's an Aftershock book, and Dave Stewart is on colors, which, if you watched when I was flipping through that, play a big part of this. A lot of different hues and tones that are kind of taken there. I mean, you can see sort of that sort of general gray and sort of dark overtone that's used here on the cover, but undercut by some very bright, reds that you get there. And that's the kind of thing that you see there. There's sort of a general pallor that's there, and then undercut with some, flashes of color. So this is one that I bought kind of blind. I had that cover that I showed off in the last section that I got from Ben, and I was like, well, I should probably read it if I have this cover now. And I'm really glad I did. This was not the story that I thought it was going to be, but that's a good thing. I actually enjoyed the fact that this was a different kind of story than I thought it was. There's a lot going on. Thematically, there's a lot of, the ideas of rebirth, of cycles, of who we can trust. A lot of things playing out there. So, with that, have you guys read this one? If you have, let me know down below what you thought of it. I can't say I've ever heard glowing praise for this. The people I know that have read it have been like, yeah, it's pretty good, it's worth a read. I would probably go a little stronger than this. I don't know that you necessarily need to buy this big oversized edition, which has the 15 issues of the original series, has the one-shot, and then the 5-issue After the Flood miniseries. But I think it's definitely worth experiencing. If you can read it digitally, I think this is a perfect read. Especially because this isn't going to be the kind of story for everyone. Like I said before at the top, Kicks, if you're watching this, get off. Stop watching this. This is not for you. But, was it for you if you read it? If you haven't read it, does it sound like the kind of thing that you might want to check out? I don't know. I played a lot of games like Shin Megami Tensei back in the day. I love kind of Judeo-Christian mythology as kind of a background for things. So I was a sucker for this. It was always going to be something that piqued my interest. But with that, I've been Bunkmaster B. You all have been amazing. I'll catch you next time.